If Mrs. Bell across the road hadn't seen me collapse beside the porch steps that Christmas Eve, I might have frozen to death outside the very house my husband had died protecting for me. The strange part was not the snow. In Vermont, snow on Christmas Eve was expected. The strange part was the light coming from inside the house. Warm yellow windows. A fire burning in the stone fireplace. Music playing low enough that I could still hear the laughter. My in-laws were inside, drinking wine beneath the garland I had helped Richard hang for 17 Christmases. And I was outside, in a thin wool coat, my fingers numb, my phone at 3%, staring at a keypad that no longer accepted my code. I typed the number again. Richard's birthday. Then mine. Then our anniversary. Wrong. 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 The lock blinked red each time, like the house itself was rejecting me. I knocked once, politely at first. Then harder. Snow gathered on my shoulders and melted into my hair. Through the narrow glass beside the front door, I saw my mother-in-law, Margaret Whitmore, turn her head. She looked directly at me. For one breath, I thought she would open the door. Instead, she lifted her glass. Behind her, my brother-in-law Derek laughed at something his wife Claire whispered. Charles, my father-in-law, sat near the fire with his legs crossed, as calm as if the woman freezing outside was not the widow of his only son. I knocked again. Margaret, I called, my voice cracking. Please. The code isn't working. She came closer, but only close enough for me to hear her through the door. You shouldn't have come back, Evelyn. My heart stumbled. You invited me. I invited Richard's widow to Christmas dinner, she said. Not a woman trying to take what belongs to this family. I pressed one hand to the glass. I don't know what you're talking about. Please open the door. Derek appeared behind her with my overnight bag in his hand. He opened the door just wide enough to throw it onto the porch. My clothes spilled across the wet boards. A framed photograph of Richard and me slid out, hit the step, and cracked across his smiling face. Take the hint, Derek said. Christmas is for family. Then the door shut. The click of the lock sounded louder than the wind. I stood there, unable to move. Not because I was weak, but because grief sometimes freezes the mind before the body. Richard had been gone 9 months. 9 months of sleeping on one side of the bed. 9 months of hearing his voice in empty rooms. 9 months of trying to be kind to people who treated my kindness like surrender. Inside, they began singing. Silent Night. Outside, I bent to pick up the broken picture. The glass cut my thumb, and a small red drop fell onto the snow. That was when I remembered what Richard had told me 3 weeks before he died. If they ever make you feel small in that house, he whispered from the hospital bed, call Nathan. Don't argue. Don't beg. Just call Nathan. Nathan Brooks was Richard's lawyer. I had never liked legal things. Deeds, trusts, documents, all of it made me nervous. Richard handled those matters. I handled our life. The food, the birthdays, the small rituals that made a house feel human. But that night, standing outside while my in-laws laughed inside, I finally understood why Richard had looked so frightened when he said those words. My phone trembled in my hand. 2%. I found Nathan's number. The call rang once. Twice. Then my screen went black. I stared at it, empty and helpless, until a porch light across the road flickered on. Mrs. Bell, our elderly neighbor, opened her front door and shouted through the snow. Evelyn? Is that you? I tried to answer, but my knees folded. The last thing I saw before she reached me was Margaret's silhouette at the window, watching me fall. What they didn't know was that by locking me out that night, they had made the one mistake Richard had prepared for years earlier. They thought the house was theirs. By New Year's Day, they would be standing at my door, begging me not to take it back. Mrs. Bell wrapped me in 2 quilts and sat me beside her kitchen radiator while I shook so badly the mug of tea rattled against my teeth. She was 78, widowed twice, and the kind of woman who could look at your face and know which questions not to ask first. She didn't say, "What happened?" She didn't say, "Why would they do that?" She simply took my coat, placed my bleeding hand under warm water, and said, "Breathe, Evelyn. You're not outside anymore." But part of me still was. I could still see the house across the road through her lace curtains. The Whitmore house looked beautiful from the outside. White siding, dark green shutters, a wide porch wrapped in pine garland, and candles glowing in every window. Richard had loved that house. He used to say it was the only place where his childhood had felt peaceful, though I later learned peace was never what Margaret had given him. She had given him expectations. Rules. Silence when he disappointed her. Affection only when he obeyed. When Richard married me, Margaret smiled in the wedding photos, but her eyes looked like she had lost something. "You're very sweet," she told me that day. Richard always did like rescuing people. I laughed then because I did not know it was an insult. For 17 years, I tried to become someone his family could love. I hosted Easter brunches. I remembered Charles's medications. I sent Derek birthday gifts even when he forgot mine. I listened to Claire complain about everything from table linens to inheritance taxes. I believed that if I was patient enough, useful enough, quiet enough, they would eventually stop seeing me as an outsider. Richard saw the truth before I did. "They don't want a daughter," he once told me. "They want access." I told him he was being harsh. Family was complicated, I said. People grieved in strange ways. Margaret had always been controlling, but maybe that was how she protected herself. Then Richard died, and the masks came off. At the funeral, Margaret held my hand in front of everyone. But during the reception, I heard her in the hallway telling Charles, "We need to know what he left her before she gets emotional and difficult." 2 weeks later, Derek came to my house and asked if Richard had left any business folders. He said there were old family documents that should be returned to the Whitmores. "What kind of documents?" I asked. He shrugged. "Stuff you wouldn't understand." Claire began calling me with soft, poisonous concern. "Evelyn, are you sure you can maintain that big house alone?" "Evelyn, maybe it's time to downsize." "Evelyn, grief makes women cling to things that aren't really theirs." Each comment was a needle, small enough to deny, sharp enough to bleed. The Vermont house became the center of it all. Richard and I had spent every Christmas Eve there after we married. He repaired the back deck himself. I planted lavender near the stone path. We kept a box of ornaments in the attic labeled Evelyn and Richard, forever ridiculous, because every ornament was something silly. A tiny lobster from Maine, a glass taxi from our New York trip, a wooden moon from the year we promised to stop working late and watch the sky more often. After Richard's death, Margaret started calling it the family property more often. Not Richard's house, not our Christmas house, the family property. That phrase appeared again when she invited me to Christmas Eve dinner. Her voice on the phone was unusually gentle. "Evelyn, Richard would want us together this year." I closed my eyes. I had planned to spend Christmas alone with a frozen dinner and old movies, pretending the empty chair beside me did not exist. "You really want me there?" I asked. There was a pause so brief most people would miss it. "Of course. You're still connected to us. Not family. Connected." Still, I said yes. Because grief makes you hungry for crumbs from tables where you once sat fully loved. I packed carefully. A black dress. A warm sweater. The cranberry cake Richard loved. The framed photo from our last Christmas together. I thought maybe Margaret wanted peace. I thought maybe Derek and Claire had realized how cruel they had been. I thought the worst part of the holiday would be missing Richard. I had no idea they had invited me there to erase me. The first warning came before I even stepped inside. My old code did not work on the garage door. I stood in the driveway with snow crunching under my boots, holding the cake carrier in one hand and my overnight bag in the other. The house glowed ahead of me, warm and familiar, but the keypad blinked red. That was odd. Richard and I had never changed that code. Margaret knew it. Charles knew it. Even Derek knew it, though Richard had once said giving Derek access to anything was like leaving sugar out for ants. I walked to the front door and rang the bell. Claire opened it. She wore a cream sweater dress and diamond earrings, as if she were being photographed for a holiday catalog. Her eyes dropped to my bag. "Oh," she said, "you brought luggage. Margaret said I should stay overnight because of the roads." Claire's smile tightened. "Did she?" Before I could answer, Margaret appeared behind her. "Evelyn." She leaned in and kissed the air beside my cheek. "You made it." I stepped into the entryway and immediately noticed something was wrong. My and Richard's coats used to hang on the second set of hooks. His old wool scarf was always there, even after he died, because I had not been ready to move it. Now the hooks were empty. In their place hung Claire's white fur-trimmed coat and Derek's leather jacket. I looked toward the staircase. Where should I put my bag? Margaret waved lightly. "The laundry room is fine." I thought I misheard her. "The laundry room?" "Claire and Derek are using the main guest room," she said. "Charles and I are in the primary suite. The twins have the smaller room. There's a cot in the laundry room. You'll only be here one night." The primary suite. She meant the room Richard and I had slept in every Christmas for 17 years. My throat tightened, but I forced a smile. I see. Derek came down the stairs, buttoning his cufflinks. Evelyn, didn't expect you this early. You invited me for 6. It's 5:40. I looked at the grandfather clock. It was 6:15. He smiled, pleased with himself, and walked past me. At dinner, every seat had a name card. Mine was at the far end of the table, near the swinging kitchen door, where staff would sit if the Whitmores had staff. Richard's chair beside the fireplace was occupied by Charles. The chair I used to sit in was taken by Claire's handbag. The table was beautiful. Roast duck, glazed carrots, silver candlesticks, red napkins folded like poinsettias. Margaret had always known how to make cruelty look elegant. For the first 20 minutes, they spoke around me. Derek talked about a development deal. Claire complained about school tuition. Charles discussed property taxes. Margaret refilled wine glasses and smiled whenever I reached for mine, as if she were waiting for me to embarrass myself. Then Derek said, "The realtor thinks we should list by mid-January." I looked up. List what? The table went quiet. Claire dabbed the corner of her mouth. Margaret placed her fork down with careful precision. "The house," Derek said. Obviously, my pulse changed. "This house." Charles sighed. "Don't act surprised, Evelyn. It's expensive to maintain. Richard isn't here to play sentimental caretaker anymore." I stared at him. Richard loved this house. Richard loved many things he couldn't keep, Margaret said. I felt the sentence land like a slap. Derek leaned back. "We have an offer coming. Cash buyer. No contingencies. It would be irresponsible not to consider it." "You can't sell something just because you want money," I said. Derek's face hardened. "And you can't cling to something just because you slept in the master bedroom." Claire gave a soft laugh. I folded my hands under the table so no one would see them shake. "Richard told me there were documents about this house." Margaret's eyes flashed. "What documents?" The room changed. Not loudly. Not visibly to anyone outside that family. But I felt it. The air sharpened. Derek stopped smiling. Charles looked down at his plate. I realized then that my question had touched something real. Margaret stood. "I think you've had a long drive. Perhaps you should get some air." It was not a suggestion. I rose slowly, confused and humiliated. As I passed the kitchen, I heard Derek's voice behind me, low and urgent. "Once she's out, change the code. Tonight. Before she starts digging." That was the moment Christmas stopped feeling like a holiday. It became a trap. I did not go outside right away. I stopped in the hallway, hidden between the kitchen door and the narrow wall where Margaret kept framed photographs of every Whitmore except me. Richard as a boy with a fishing pole. Richard graduating from college. Richard standing beside Derek at Derek's wedding. Richard in a navy suit. With Margaret's hand on his shoulder like ownership. Not one picture of our wedding. Not one picture of the life he had chosen. In the kitchen, Derek continued whispering. "She knows something." Claire said, "She doesn't know anything. She's a grieving widow with a cake." She mentioned documents. Because Richard probably babbled at the end. Sick people do that. I closed my eyes. Margaret's voice came next, colder than the snow outside. "Enough. We should have done this months ago. Richard is gone. Evelyn has no children, no blood claim, and no reason to keep circling this family like a stray dog." I pressed my palm to my mouth. Charles said, "Careful. If she gets a lawyer, she won't," Margaret snapped. "Women like Evelyn don't fight. They cry. They apologize. Then they disappear." Something inside me went still. For months, I had allowed myself to be confused by their cruelty. I had searched for excuses. Grief. Stress. Miscommunication. Old habits. But hearing them speak when they thought I was gone removed the last soft place in my mind. They were not grieving Richard. They were waiting for the legal dust to settle so they could divide what remained of him. I stepped back quietly, but the floorboard creaked. The kitchen went silent. Derek appeared first. "Were you listening?" I could have lied. Instead, I said yes. Claire rolled her eyes. "That's pathetic." "No," I said, surprising myself. "What's pathetic is inviting your dead brother's wife to Christmas dinner so you can throw her out after dessert." Derek moved closer. "Be careful." "For once," I said, "I think I am being careful." Margaret stepped into the hall. Her face had changed completely. Gone was the polished hostess. In her place stood the woman Richard had tried to escape for half his life. "You have no idea what this family has carried," she said. "I carried Richard through chemo," I replied. "I carried him to the bathroom when he was too weak to stand. I carried his wedding ring home from the hospital in a plastic bag. Don't talk to me about carrying. For 1 second, no one spoke. Then Claire gave a little laugh. Very dramatic. But drama doesn't make you entitled. To what? To this. Claire gestured around the house. To his name. To his money. To family things. I looked at Margaret. Is that what this is about? Margaret stepped closer. This house belonged to the Whitmores before you appeared. It will belong to the Whitmores after you stop embarrassing yourself. Richard never said that. Richard was sentimental. And weak where you were concerned. The insult hit harder than anything she had said about me. Don't call him weak. Margaret smiled. Then stop hiding behind a dead man. I felt the room tilt. For months, I had swallowed every insult because I believed dignity meant silence. But Richard had not asked me to be silent. He had asked me to call Nathan. I reached into my purse and touched the old envelope tucked inside. Richard had given it to me during his final week. I had never opened it. Not fully. I had been afraid it would make his death feel more real. On the front, in his handwriting, were 4 words, for when they start. Derek saw me touch it. What's that? I pulled my hand away. Nothing. He grabbed for my purse. I stepped back. Don't. The movement was small, but it changed everything. Derek's face flushed with anger. Margaret's eyes narrowed. Get out, she said. I looked at her. Margaret, now. It's snowing. Then call someone who cares. Derek took my overnight bag from the laundry room and shoved it into my arms. Claire opened the front door. A gust of icy wind swept through the hallway. For one final moment, I looked past them into the living room. The Christmas tree stood in the corner, decorated with ornaments Richard and I had bought together. Our wooden moon still hung near the top. Then Derek pushed my bag onto the porch. I stepped outside to pick it up. Before I could turn around, the door slammed, and the lock clicked behind me. The cold did not feel real at first. It felt like shock, like my body had not yet accepted what my mind already knew. Snow blew sideways across the porch, stinging my cheeks. My breath came out in short white bursts. Inside, the party resumed almost immediately. That was the part one would remember most. Not the lock, not the insult, the speed with which they returned to. Celebrating after throwing me into the storm. I tried the handle. Locked. I knocked. No answer. I knocked harder until my knuckles hurt. Derek. Margaret. Open the door. A curtain moved in the front window. Claire's face appeared, pale and amused. She looked at me for a moment, then closed the curtain slowly, as if ending a performance. My overnight bag lay open beside the steps. Clothes spilled into the snow. The cranberry cake had landed upside down, red glaze bleeding into white powder like a wound. The framed photo of Richard and me had cracked down the center, the fracture slicing between our faces. I knelt to pick it up. Glass cut my thumb. Pain cleared my head. I stood, pulled my phone from my coat pocket, and saw the battery warning. 3%. I did not call Margaret. I did not call Derek. I called Nathan Brooks. The phone rang. Once. Twice. Evelyn. Nathan's voice answered, thick with sleep or concern. Are you all right? Nathan, I said, and the sound of my own voice frightened me. Richard told me to call you if they made me feel small in the house. There was a pause. Then Nathan said, where are you? Outside the Vermont house. They changed the code. They locked me out. His voice changed. It became sharp. Awake. Are you safe? No. It's snowing. Listen to me carefully. Do not leave the property without documentation if you can avoid it. Take photos. Record the lock. Record the bag. Record anything they threw out. My phone is dying. Then take what you can. Is there a neighbor? Mrs. Bell across the road. Go there now. Warm up. I'm calling local police for a welfare note, not a confrontation. Do you understand? We need this documented. A gust of wind tore at my coat. Nathan, I whispered, what did Richard do? The pause this time was longer. He protected you. My throat closed. From them? Yes. The phone beeped. 1%. What does that mean? It means the house is not theirs to lock you out of. Before I could ask anything else, the screen went black. I stood there in the dark, holding a dead phone, with Nathan's final words burning brighter than the Christmas lights. The house is not theirs. For the first time that night, something other than fear moved through me. I looked back at the front door, at the new keypad, at the windows glowing with stolen warmth. Then Mrs. Bell's porch light flickered on across the road. Evelyn, she shouted. Good Lord, Evelyn. I tried to lift my hand. My fingers would not obey. The next minutes came in pieces. Mrs. Bell's boots on snow, her arm around my waist, her voice calling me dear and poor thing and stay with me. Her kitchen smelled like cinnamon and old wood. She wrapped me in quilts, pressed a warm mug into my hands, and muttered words about wicked people and judgment. 20 minutes later, a police cruiser pulled up outside her house. Officer Harris took my statement gently. He photographed my cut thumb, my wet clothes, the cracked frame, the bag still visible across the road. He did not force the door open. He explained that property disputes could become complicated, but he wrote everything down. Mrs. Bell added her statement. She was out there long enough to fall, she said. And they knew. I saw the mother-in-law at the window. Officer Harris looked toward the house. Inside, music still played. That night, I slept in Mrs. Bell's guest room under 3 quilts. I did not sleep deeply. Every hour, I woke expecting Richard beside me. Every hour, I remembered he was gone. But before dawn, Mrs. Bell handed me her phone. It's your lawyer. I took it with both hands. Nathan said, Evelyn, I found the file. Richard's trust is active. You are the controlling beneficiary. The Vermont house is under that trust. What does that mean? I asked. It means, Nathan said, they locked you out of your own house. Outside, Christmas morning rose cold and gray. Inside me, something finally began to thaw. Nathan arrived at Mrs. Bell's house before noon on Christmas Day. He was 61, silver-haired, precise in every movement, and the kind of man who carried bad news like a sealed envelope. Carefully, respectfully, without drama. He removed his snow-dusted coat, accepted coffee from Mrs. Bell, and placed a leather folder on the kitchen table between us. I stared at it. For months after Richard died, I had avoided folders like that. Every document felt like another proof that he was gone. Hospital bills, insurance forms, death certificates, letters from banks addressed to the estate of Richard Carter. Paper had become the language of loss. But that morning, paper became something else. Protection. Nathan opened the folder. Richard came to see me 8 months before he passed, he said. He was already worried. About the cancer? About his family. I looked down. Nathan softened his voice. He knew Margaret and Derek would try to pressure you. He didn't know exactly how, but he knew the pattern. The pattern. It hurt to realize my husband had understood the war long before I admitted there was one. Nathan slid the first document toward me. This is the deed transfer. The Vermont property was moved into the Carter Winter Trust. I blinked. Carter. Richard used his chosen family name for the trust. Not Whitmore. My eyes stung. Richard had taken my last name emotionally long before the law ever mattered. He had once joked that the Whitmore name came with too many ghosts. Nathan continued. Upon his death, the trust became irrevocable. You are the primary beneficiary and trustee. That means you control the property. Margaret, Charles, Derek, and Claire have no ownership interest. I touched the edge of the page but did not pick it up. Then why did they think they could sell it? They may not know the full structure, Nathan said. Or Derek may know enough to be dangerous, but not enough to be smart. Mrs. Bell made a disapproving sound from the stove. Nathan removed another document. Richard instructed me to notify involved parties after his death. Letters were sent. One to Margaret and Charles. One to Derek. One to you. I never received anything. I suspected that. Nathan's eyes narrowed slightly. Your letter was sent to the house you shared with Richard. Did anyone have access to your mail? I remembered Derek stopping by after the funeral. He had brought flowers. He stayed in the entryway while I made tea. Later, I noticed several sympathy cards had been moved from the mail tray. I felt sick. I don't know, I said. Maybe. Nathan did not push. We will document that. I looked through the window toward the Whitmore house. Smoke curled from the chimney. They were still there, still warm, still acting as if the world belonged to them. What happens now? I asked. Now we do not act emotionally. We act correctly. I want them out. I know. And we will get there. But if we move too carelessly, they'll claim confusion, grief, family misunderstanding. We need a clean record. He made a list on a yellow legal pad. Photos of the lock. Photos of my belongings outside. Police welfare note. Mrs. Bell's statement. Copy of Margaret's invitation. Screenshots of any messages from Derek or Claire. Certified notice demanding they vacate and cease any attempt to sell, lease, damage, or restrict access to the property. Then, if they refused, formal removal through the appropriate legal process. I listened, almost numb. Part of me wanted a dramatic scene. I wanted to march across the road, throw the door open, and tell Margaret she had spent Christmas Eve inside a house that belonged to the woman she had treated like trash. But Richard's voice came back to me. Don't argue. Don't beg. Call Nathan. So I nodded. Nathan looked at me carefully. Evelyn, there is one more thing. He opened a smaller envelope. Richard's handwriting was on the front. For Evie, when the house no longer feels safe. My hand flew to my mouth. Nathan said, he asked me to give it to you only if they forced the issue. I opened it with shaking fingers. Inside was a short letter. My Evie, if you are reading this, then I was right, and I am so sorry. I wanted to believe they would find decency after I was gone. But I knew better. This house is yours not because I pitied you, and not because I was angry at them. It is yours because you made it a home when all they ever saw was an asset. Do not let them convince you that love makes you weak. You loved me better than anyone ever did. Let the law do what my body no longer can. Come home. I pressed the letter to my chest and cried for the first time since they locked me out. Not because I was defeated, because even from the grave, Richard had opened the door. On December 26th, my in-laws expected me to disappear. That was their first mistake. They expected me to be embarrassed. That was their second. They expected me to be alone. That was their biggest. I spent the day at Mrs. Bell's kitchen table with Nathan on one side and a borrowed phone charger on the other. My coat hung near the radiator. My cut thumb was wrapped in a small bandage. My body still ached from the cold, but my mind had become strangely clear. Nathan called it the useful stage of grief. When pain has burned through panic, he said, people either collapse or become very organized. I became organized. We gathered everything. Margaret's text message inviting me to Christmas Eve dinner. A voicemail from Claire telling me to bring whatever little dessert you want, but don't overdo it. Photos of my belongings in the snow. Photos of the changed keypad. Photos of the cracked frame. Officer Harris's incident note. Mrs. Bell's written statement. A screenshot of Claire's Christmas post, uploaded 30 minutes after they locked me out. The photo showed Margaret, Charles, Derek, Claire, and the children smiling in front of Richard's fireplace. The caption read, "Nothing matters more than family." I stared at that sentence for a long time. Then I sent it to Nathan. Good, he said. It establishes they remained inside the property while aware you were excluded. The word excluded sounded so clean compared to what it felt like. But legal language was useful because it did not tremble. It did not cry. It did not get distracted by insults. Derek called at 11:14 a.m. I let it ring. He called again. Then Margaret. Then Claire. I still did not answer. Finally, Derek sent a text. You made a mistake involving police. This is family business. Call me before it gets ugly. Nathan read it and smiled without humor. It is already ugly. He simply dislikes witnesses. By afternoon, we learned Derek had contacted a realtor 2 weeks earlier. He had described himself as authorized family representative. He had requested a fast cash listing after the holidays. Nathan's jaw tightened when he read the email. This is important. Is it illegal? Potentially. At minimum, it shows intent. Intent. Another clean word for greed wearing a Christmas sweater. That evening, I went with Mrs. Bell to retrieve my belongings from the porch. Nathan advised me not to step beyond the entry unless escorted. Officer Harris had already documented the scene, but I wanted the photo. The broken one of Richard and me. The house was quiet when we crossed the road. No one opened the door. No one came outside. But I saw movement behind the upstairs curtain. They were watching. Mrs. Bell bent to pick up my sweater, now stiff with frozen water. She muttered, "Cowards." I picked up the photograph. The glass was cracked, but the picture beneath was intact. Richard had his arm around me, his cheek pressed to mine, both of us laughing because the timer camera had fallen just before taking the shot. I brushed snow from his face. Then I looked at the house. For the first time, I did not see Margaret's domain. I saw the lavender I planted, the porch Richard rebuilt, the living room where we danced without music, the kitchen where he burned pancakes every Christmas morning and insisted the smoke alarm was part of the tradition. They had not locked me out of their house. They had locked me out of my memories. That was unforgivable, but I still did not scream. I took one more photo, turned around, and went back to Mrs. Bell's. The next morning, December 27th, Nathan sent the certified notice. To Margaret Whitmore. To Charles Whitmore. To Derek Whitmore. To Claire Whitmore. The letter stated that the property known as 1847 Winter Pine Road was held by the Carter Winter Trust, with Evelyn Carter as trustee and controlling beneficiary. Their continued occupation, restriction of access, attempted sale, or alteration of locks without authorization was not permitted. They were instructed to vacate, return all keys and access codes, preserve all property, and direct further communication through counsel. Nathan read the final line aloud to me before sending it. Failure to comply may result in civil action, claims for damages, and formal removal. I nodded. Send it. Within 4 hours, Derek called 26 times. I answered none of them. By sunset, the laughter inside that house had stopped. Margaret called at 7:32 that evening. This time, Nathan told me to answer, but only with him listening on speaker. I sat at Mrs. Bell's table. My hands were folded around Richard's letter. Nathan sat across from me with a pen ready. Mrs. Bell stood near the sink pretending to wash the same cup for 5 minutes. I pressed accept. Before I could speak, Margaret's voice exploded through the phone. How dare you? I looked at Nathan. He nodded for me to remain calm. Good evening, Margaret. Do not good evening me. You sent a lawyer's threat to my home. No, I said. Nathan sent a legal notice to my property. There was a sharp silence. Then Derek's voice cut in. You arrogant little. Nathan raised one finger. I interrupted softly. Derek, if you insult me, this call ends. He laughed. You think a few papers make you powerful? No, I said. I think Richard's legally executed trust does. Margaret made a sound like she had been slapped. Richard would never do this to his family. That was the sentence that finally steadied me. He did it because of his family. Another silence. Charles came on the line next. His voice was lower, controlled. Evelyn, this has gone too far. We can discuss a reasonable arrangement. You mean the arrangement where you lock me outside in a storm and sell the house behind my back? That was unfortunate, Charles said. I almost laughed. Unfortunate. A flat tire was unfortunate. A canceled flight was unfortunate. Throwing a widow into the snow on Christmas Eve was not unfortunate. It was chosen. Nathan leaned toward the phone. This is Nathan Brooks, counsel for Mrs. Carter in her capacity as trustee. All further communication should be directed to my office. Margaret snapped. I don't recognize your authority. You don't need to recognize it, Nathan said. You need to comply with the notice. Derek cursed. That house is Whitmore property. Nathan replied. It was transferred before Richard Carter's death. The deed is recorded. The trust is active. Your attempted sale communications have also been documented. The line changed again. Panic has a sound. It is subtle at first, hiding behind anger. Derek's breathing became louder. Claire whispered something in the background. Margaret did not speak. Then she said, Evelyn, listen to me. Whatever Richard signed, he was sick. He wasn't thinking clearly. The cruelty of that nearly broke my composure. Richard had signed those documents while he was still driving himself to appointments, still balancing accounts, still making jokes to nurses, still protecting me because his mind remained sharper than anyone gave him credit for. You will not use his illness to steal his choice, I said. Margaret's voice lowered. You ungrateful woman. For what? I asked. The cot in the laundry room? The insults at dinner? The snow? No one answered. I continued, slowly. You told me Christmas was for family. Richard was my family. This house was our home. And you left me outside it like I was nothing. For a moment, I thought Margaret might apologize. Instead, she said, if you force this, you will regret it. Nathan ended the call. My whole body shook afterward. Mrs. Bell brought fresh tea, though none of us wanted it. Nathan made notes. Threatening language. Refusal to comply. Good to know. I looked at him. What if they destroy something? We prepare for that. What if they refuse to leave? Then we proceed formally. What if they tell everyone I stole it? Nathan closed his folder. Then we let documents speak louder than gossip. That night, I did not sleep much. But for the first time since Richard died, I did not dream of losing him. I dreamed of walking through the front door of the Vermont house while snow melted behind me. The next day, Derek's realtor emailed Nathan. She had received a copy of the notice and was withdrawing from any listing discussion until ownership was clarified. Nathan forwarded me the message with 3 words. The wall cracked. By December 29th, other cracks appeared. Derek's bank would not accept the house as collateral. Charles's accountant asked for trust documents. Claire deleted her Christmas post. And Margaret, who had once made humiliation look effortless, stopped answering her phone. They had thought I was a woman without leverage. They had forgotten Richard loved me in paperwork, not just promises. On December 30th, I learned why Derek had been so desperate. It came from the last person I expected, Uncle Martin, Charles's younger brother. He called Nathan first, then asked if he could speak with me directly. I agreed because Richard had liked Martin. He once said Martin was the only Whitmore who knew when to leave a room before becoming cruel. His voice sounded tired when he called. "Evelyn, I owe you an apology." "You don't," I said automatically. "Yes," he replied. "I do. I knew Margaret was pushing Derek toward the property. I didn't know they would do what they did on Christmas Eve." I looked at the snow outside Mrs. Bell's window. "What did you know?" Martin exhaled. "Derek's business is failing. Worse than failing. He borrowed against future contracts that never came through. He owes money to private lenders. Not bank money. The kind that makes men lose sleep." I closed my eyes. The pieces moved into place. The fast sale. The changed locks. The sudden invitation. The way Derek panicked when I mentioned documents. "He needed the house," I said. "He needed the idea of the house," Martin corrected. "He was telling people he could access family property after the holidays. Margaret believed selling would protect him. Charles wanted the taxes and maintenance off his books. Claire wanted distance from the debt without losing the lifestyle. And I was in the way. You were the widow they hoped would be too sad to fight." The sentence landed hard, but it did not surprise me anymore. Martin continued. "Richard knew Derek would eventually do something like this. That is why he moved the house. He told me once he wanted at least one place in his life that Margaret couldn't turn into a weapon." I wiped my face. "He should have told me everything. He was trying to keep you from spending his last months afraid." That sounded like Richard. Loving, protective, and sometimes wrong in the most heartbreaking way. After the call, Nathan filed additional notices to prevent unauthorized sale or damage. He also arranged for a locksmith and a property inspection to be present when we returned. Everything had to be documented. Every step had to be clean. Meanwhile, the Whitmores began rewriting the story. A cousin texted me. "Margaret says you're trying to evict them during the holidays. Is that true?" I replied with one sentence Nathan approved. "They locked me out in freezing weather on Christmas Eve from a property legally controlled by Richard's trust. My attorney is handling it. No emotion. No drama. Just enough truth to puncture the lie." By evening, 2 more relatives reached out privately. One said Margaret had been telling people I had manipulated Richard while he was sick. Another said Derek had claimed I forged documents. Nathan was ready for that. He had medical competency records from the date Richard signed. He had witnesses. He had notarized documents. He had recordings of Richard's instructions to the firm. People who rely on shame, Nathan told me, panic when shame stops working. That night, I finally opened the envelope Richard had given me from my purse, the one marked for when they start. Inside was not a legal document. It was a list. Richard had written down things I had done in the Vermont house. Evie painted the kitchen blue when Mother said it should stay beige. Evie planted lavender because the house smelled too much like old money and dust. Evie made Christmas bearable. Evie taught me a home is not inherited. It is made. At the bottom, he wrote, "If they say blood matters more than love, remember this. Blood made me a Whitmore. Love made me yours." I cried quietly, but not helplessly. The next morning was New Year's Eve. Nathan called at 8 a.m. They have not vacated. Margaret's lawyer responded, but weakly. No injunction. No competing deed. No legal basis to exclude you. So what happens now? We go to the house. My stomach tightened. Today? Yes. With Officer Harris present for peacekeeping. With a locksmith. With copies of every document. We do not provoke. We do not threaten. We assert access. I looked toward the road. The house sat beneath fresh snow, beautiful and false. For the first time since Christmas Eve, I put on the black wool coat Richard loved. I pinned my hair back. I placed his letter in my purse. Then I said, "I'm ready." And I meant it. The driveway looked different when I returned on New Year's Eve. Not because the snow had changed. Not because the house had changed. Because I had. On Christmas Eve, I had walked up those steps hoping to be accepted. On New Year's Eve, I walked up knowing I did not need their permission to belong. Nathan parked behind Officer Harris's cruiser. A locksmith named Paul arrived in a gray van. Mrs. Bell insisted on coming too, wrapped in a purple coat and carrying a thermos like she was attending a battlefield picnic. "You may need a witness," she said. Nathan did not argue. The front door opened before we knocked. Margaret stood there in emerald silk, pearls at her throat, her face pale beneath perfect makeup. Behind her, the house was decorated for a New Year's gathering. Champagne flutes lined the sideboard. Silver streamers hung from the mantel. A platter of expensive appetizers sat untouched on the dining table. For one sharp second, I saw Christmas Eve again. The same doorway. The same woman. Only this time, I was not shivering. Margaret looked at Officer Harris. "This is a private matter." Officer Harris nodded politely. "Ma'am, I'm here to keep the peace while documentation is reviewed." Derek appeared behind her. His hair was uncombed, his eyes bloodshot. "This is harassment." Nathan stepped forward. "This is lawful access by the trustee of the property owner." He handed copies of the deed, trust certification, and notice to Margaret's lawyer, who had arrived minutes before us and looked like he wished he had chosen a different career. The lawyer read silently. Then again. Then he pulled Margaret aside. I could not hear every word, but I heard enough. Recorded deed. No basis to exclude. Do not escalate. Derek did escalate. He pushed past Margaret and pointed at me. "You planned this." I looked at him. "No, Derek. You did. I just survived it." His face twisted. "Richard would be ashamed of you." That used to be the sentence they held like a knife. This time it missed. "Richard wrote me a letter for this exact situation," I said. "He knew you better than I did." Margaret flinched. Charles came down the stairs slowly, carrying a box of papers. He looked smaller than I remembered, not because he had changed, but because I had stopped. Mistaking silence for strength. "Evelyn," he said, "surely we can resolve this privately." "We could have," I replied. "Before the changed locks. Before the realtor. Before Christmas Eve." Claire stood near the fireplace, crying softly, though no tears touched her mascara. "Our children are here." I looked toward the hallway where her twins peeked from behind a wall. "I know," I said. "That is why I am doing this properly." Nathan addressed the room. "No one is being physically removed today without process. However, Mrs. Carter's access may not be blocked, locks may not be changed against her, and no property may be removed except personal belongings. A schedule for vacating will be handled through counsel." Paul, the locksmith, walked to the keypad. Derek lunged forward. Officer Harris stepped between him and Paul. "Sir," Harris said calmly, "don't." The word was quiet, but Derek stopped. Paul reset the code. The small beep echoed through the entryway. Such a tiny sound. Yet it felt like a door opening somewhere deep inside me. Nathan handed me the new access card. My fingers closed around it. Margaret stared at my hand, as if watching a crown pass to a servant. "You'll regret humiliating this family," she whispered. I stepped closer, lowering my voice so only she could hear. "No, Margaret. Humiliation is being left outside in the snow while people sing Christmas songs over your suffering. This is accountability." Her eyes filled with tears then, though whether from shame or rage, I could not tell. At 4:15 p.m., the Whitmores left the house temporarily with their lawyer to discuss next steps. Derek slammed the car door. Claire avoided my eyes. Charles looked exhausted. Margaret paused at the porch. For one moment, she seemed about to say something. Maybe an apology. Maybe another threat. Instead, she walked away. I stood in the doorway and watched their cars disappear down the snowy road. Then I stepped inside. The house smelled like pine, smoke, and fear. I walked to the fireplace and found the wooden moon ornament still hanging near the top of the tree. Richard and I had bought it the year he told me, laughing, "If my family ever gets too dramatic, we'll move to the moon." I touched the ornament gently. "We got the house back," I whispered. And for the first time since he died, the silence did not feel empty. They came back the next day, New Year's Day. The title of my life seemed almost too cruelly perfect. By noon, Nathan had gone to his hotel to prepare filings. Mrs. Bell had returned home after making me promise to call if those vultures flapped back. I was alone in the Vermont house for the first time since Richard's funeral. I did not celebrate. I cleaned. Not because the house was dirty, but because I needed to touch every room and remind myself it was real. I folded blankets, washed glasses, took Claire's scented candles off my mantel and placed them in a box. Removed Margaret's silver ribbon from the staircase. In the primary bedroom, I stripped the sheets they had used and opened the windows to the cold air. Then I brought Richard's photograph upstairs. The cracked frame sat on the dresser. I had replaced the broken glass with a temporary clear sleeve Mrs. Bell found in a drawer. The crack no longer split our faces, but I could still see where it had been. Some damage never fully disappears. It simply stops controlling the picture. At 3:40 p.m., someone knocked. Not rang the bell. Knocked. A hesitant, uneven sound. I looked through the side window. Margaret stood on the porch in the same wool coat she had worn to Richard's funeral. Charles stood behind her, shoulders hunched. Derek paced near the steps, phone in hand. Claire held the twins close, though the children looked more confused than cold. For a moment, I did not move. On Christmas Eve, I had stood outside that same door begging to be let in. Now they stood there waiting for me. The symmetry was so sharp it almost hurt. I opened the door halfway. Cold air entered, but this time I was warm. Margaret's face changed when she saw me. Not anger first. Not pride. Fear. "Evelyn," she said. I waited. She swallowed. "We need to talk. You have an attorney. This isn't about documents." I almost smiled. "It became about documents when you changed the locks." Derek stepped forward. "Look, I need time." I looked at him fully. "You had time. You used it to contact a realtor." His jaw tightened. "You don't understand what I'm dealing with." "No," I said. "I understand exactly what you were trying to make me deal with." Claire began crying. "We don't have anywhere ready. The kids." I raised my hand gently. "Do not use your children as shields. I am not putting them outside in a storm. That was your family's method, not mine." Claire looked away. Charles spoke next. His voice was rough. "Evelyn, Richard loved this family." "Yes," I said. "And look what loving this family cost him." Margaret flinched. Then, finally, she broke. Not dramatically. Not beautifully. She simply seemed to shrink inside her coat. "I was angry," she said. I said nothing. "When Richard married you, I felt like I lost him. And when he died, I thought," her voice cracked, "I thought if I kept the house, I could keep something that was still mine." I looked at her carefully. There was pain there. Real pain. But pain did not erase cruelty. "You did not try to keep Richard," I said. "You tried to erase the woman he loved." Her mouth trembled. "I know." Those two words were the first honest ones I had heard from her in years. Derek muttered, "Mom, don't." Margaret turned on him. "Be quiet." He did. Then she looked back at me. "Please," she said. "We need a few weeks. Derek's situation is complicated. Charles is not well. The children are frightened. I know what happened on Christmas Eve was." She stopped, unable to find a gentle word for something that had none. "It was wrong." I looked down at the porch boards. Snow had gathered along the edges. I remembered kneeling there, bleeding onto white wood while they watched. "Say it clearly," I said. Margaret's eyes filled. "We left you outside in the cold. And we knew you were there. And," her voice dropped, "we wanted you to feel unwanted." The truth stood between us, ugly and clean. I breathed in slowly. Behind me, the house was warm. Behind them, the snow kept falling. For 1 second, I understood how easy it would be to become them. To close the door. To let them feel the cold. To tell myself they deserved it. Instead, I thought of Richard. "Love made me yours." I opened the door wider, but I did not step aside. "You may stand in the entry while we talk," I said. "No farther." Margaret nodded quickly, grateful for even that inch of mercy. And as they stepped over the threshold, I realized the revenge I wanted had changed. I no longer needed them destroyed. I needed them to understand that I had survived without becoming cruel. I let them stand in the entryway beneath the garland Richard had always hated because it shed needles into his coffee. No one removed their coats. No one asked to sit. That mattered. The house finally understood who belonged where. Margaret stood closest to me, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles turned white. Charles leaned against the wall as if his age had arrived all at once. Derek kept looking around the house like a man calculating value, even while begging for mercy. Claire held the twins by their shoulders, silent now. I had already decided what I would say before opening the door. Because mercy without boundaries is just another invitation for people to hurt you. "You cannot stay here," I began. Derek immediately opened his mouth, but Margaret stopped him with one look. I continued, "You will not sell this house. You will not list it. You will not use it as collateral. You will not remove anything Richard and I own together. Nathan will coordinate a supervised schedule for you to collect personal belongings. You will have 48 hours to identify what is yours and anything disputed stays until it is reviewed. Claire whispered, 48 hours. I looked at her. On Christmas Eve, you gave me less than 48 seconds to pick up my life from the snow. She lowered her eyes. Charles said, and after that, you leave this property alone. Derek laughed bitterly. So that's it. You win and we crawl away. I turned to him. No, Derek. You face the consequences of trying to sell something that was not yours. Whether those consequences are civil, financial, or personal depends on what you do next. His face reddened. You don't know who I owe. No, I said. But I know I am not paying your debts with Richard's peace. That silenced him. Margaret looked toward the living room. Her eyes landed on the Christmas tree, on the wooden moon ornament near the top. Her expression changed. Richard loved that ridiculous thing, she whispered. I followed her gaze. Yes, he did. For the first time, we were not enemies speaking across property lines. We were two women standing inside the remains of the same man's life. One had loved him by freeing him. The other had loved him by trying to own him. Margaret's voice broke. I don't know how to be without controlling what's left. I believed her, but I was done letting broken people use honesty as a key. Then learn somewhere else, I said gently. She looked at me, and tears slipped down her face. I am sorry, Evelyn. I waited for my body to reject the words, to crave more, to demand a perfect apology that could undo Christmas Eve, the cracked photograph, the years of small exclusions, the cot in the laundry room, the way she had called me a stray dog when she thought I could not hear. But apologies do not travel backward. They only tell you whether someone is willing to face forward differently. I hear you, I said, but I am not ready to forgive you. Margaret nodded. I understand. Maybe she did. Maybe she only understood loss now that it had chosen her side of the door. Either way, I no longer needed to solve her. Nathan arrived 20 minutes later. He reviewed the terms. Officer Harris came by briefly to document that the conversation remained peaceful. The Whitmores left without shouting. Derek was the last one out. At the threshold, he paused and looked back. This house will feel empty, he said. I thought of Richard's laugh in the kitchen, Mrs. Bell's quilts, the lavender beneath the snow, the letter in my purse, the women who might one day need warmth here the way I had needed it. No, I said. It finally doesn't. He left. When the door closed, I locked it from the inside. Not out of fear, out of choice. That evening, I took down the decorations Margaret had added and kept the ones Richard and I loved. The wooden moon stayed. The lobster stayed. The glass taxi stayed. I placed the cracked photograph on the mantel beside Richard's letter. Then I made a decision. The Vermont house would not become a shrine to betrayal. It would become what Richard always believed it was, shelter. By the next Christmas, with Nathan's help, I created a small holiday retreat for widows, caregivers, and women who had nowhere safe to go during the season everyone else called joyful. Mrs. Bell helped me bake. Uncle Martin sent firewood. Even Officer Harris dropped off extra blankets from a community drive. The first woman who arrived was named Paula. She had lost her husband that spring and said she almost stayed home because she did not want to burden anyone. I opened the door and told her, "You are not a burden here." The words healed something in both of us. On New Year's Eve 1 year later, I stood on the porch alone, wrapped in Richard's old scarf. Snow fell softly over the road. The windows glowed behind me. For a moment, I remembered that night. My numb hands, the dead phone, Margaret's silhouette watching me fall. Then I remembered New Year's Day, the knock, the begging, the truth finally spoken. But most of all, I remembered Richard's words. "This house is yours because you made it a home." I looked at the warm lights spilling across the porch boards and whispered, "We did, Richard." On Christmas Eve, my in-laws left me freezing outside a house they thought was theirs. By New Year's, they were begging at my door. And by the next Christmas, that same door opened for women who had forgotten what it felt like to be welcomed. That was my revenge. Not that they lost the house, but that I finally came home and became the kind of woman who would never leave someone out in the cold.